All right, everybody. Welcome to video 2 of the Armchair Expert's Guide to Writing. And with this one, I'm going to talk about writer's block, which is something that really gets brought up a lot on forums. I'm sure a lot of people are constantly trying to find a solution to this particular issue. It's one of the more popular posts on message forums and Reddit subreddits that have to do with writing. So I'm sure that a lot of you are out there probably dealing with it, or perhaps think you're dealing with it when you may be actually dealing with something else. All right. So basically, I'm going to differentiate between writer's block and procrastination, where writer's block can lead to procrastination, but it is not in and of itself the same thing as procrastination. So basically, for me, writer's block is where you are writing, you do have work done, you're working constantly on your process and getting stuff on the page, and then you suddenly reach almost like a creative stalemate with your writing, where you really can't push any further because your mind is kind of in a blocked state, I guess, writer's block, where you aren't able to proceed with whatever you're currently doing, whether it's coming up with a logical conclusion to events that have taken place, whether it's dialogue that seems it doesn't really seem right to you, even if you're coming up with character names, or if you're trying to put the chapters in a certain order, and you just reach this point where you just are drawing a blank and you can't proceed past that, and you're sitting there at your computer, or you're with your pad, pencil or pen, and you just can't, for whatever reason, you just can't proceed further. You're just drawing a complete blank. You're stuck. That's what I consider writer's block, as opposed to procrastination, where you are basically trying to find any excuse to not even proceed with writing. So you basically haven't gotten even to the point where you can even really have writer's block, because you haven't committed, at least consistently, to writing. So basically, you're looking just for an excuse. You may be telling yourself, okay, today I'm going to sit down in front of the keyboard and I'm going to type 2,000 words. I'm going to come up with a list of character names and characters, and write a little bit about each of them, get a little bit of description, and maybe you're going to do some world building writing, where you're dealing with the setting and whatever mythical creatures maybe you're doing, like a fantasy novel. And you're telling yourself you're going to do this, but when it comes to, shit or get off the pot, all of a sudden you are off doing something else completely different, and you haven't committed at all to actually sitting down and even starting to do anything. And you may later on in the day feel guilty about that, and then tell yourself, well, tomorrow's going to be the day. I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to sit down and commit to writing. I'm not going to get up this chair. The next day comes, and it's the same thing all over, and you're looking for any kind of excuse to get away from actually sitting down and committing to writing. So, getting frustrated by writer's block can lead to procrastination, because, you may have gotten to the point where, become aggravated, or your confidence takes a hit, and you just, can't push yourself forward to just sit there and try to work your way through it. So maybe you start avoiding writing, and taking a breather and stepping back from your writing isn't a bad thing. It's just when that becomes a habit where you're avoiding it altogether and you're making up excuses, and then, it turns into procrastination. But stepping away from any kind of a creative project for, a little bit of time, maybe even you're going to start something completely different. Maybe you're writing a fantasy story, in a kind of like in the Tolkien vein of, kind of a pseudo history of a European nation, or a pseudo European nation, or something with, mythical creatures. Maybe you completely switch gears and start writing something that's more contemporary. Maybe you're going to write, a supernatural horror or something like that, in the vein of, Lovecraft or something, and you're going to place it, in the 1950s or 1940s or something like that. Something that gets your mind completely working in a completely different way. because the subject matter is different. The world building aspects are different, assuming you just want to deal with, you want to be extremely accurate to the, the area that you're setting everything in. And, that may help your creative juices get flowing again, get out of this rut you feel, bound up that you can't move forward with, these ideas that you've created. So that works. But yeah, just don't turn that into an excuse to, I'm not, finding excuses to not write and letting that kind of get away and start forming a bad habit that gets you away from your previous routine, if you will. But yeah, that's pretty much the difference in my mind. If you're avoiding writing altogether, like you're saying, I just really want to write, I've got all these great ideas, it's going to make a great story. I've got all these interesting characters. I've got a whole new twist on some of the old tropes. I'm going to set it in this really weird, kind of crazy world that people are, going to freak out because it's going to be so different and so unique. But you never once actually sit down and write any of it out. You're kind of kidding yourself. And then that's just creating, procrastination to keep you from doing that. You've never really even sat down. That's kind of what procrastination is creating. Like I said in the first video, you have to write, or you're basically just daydreaming, which, isn't necessarily a bad thing. You shouldn't beat yourself up over that. If you're, you just like to sit around and daydream and think up all these weird ideas for stories and stuff, it's in and of itself, you're at least embracing your imagination, and that can be enjoyable. But you have to make the commitment to sit down and start putting all that down on paper. Just, even if it's just this huge, just wall of text where you're just throwing out every idea and just, getting it all out there, almost like vomiting words into the keyboard and getting it all out there. Because once you have something in front of you, then you have something to work with. But yeah, that's pretty much the difference between writer's block and procrastination. Be able to differentiate between the two. Realize if you're starting to make excuses, or if you're just all you're doing is making excuses. You keep track of the days you're actually writing, your word count, even though you don't have to set a certain approved word count for your beginning venture into writing. But routine is very important, and I could do a whole video on routine. But basically, successful people have a routine. Billionaires, millionaires, multimillionaires, successful people typically, unless they're a rock star or somebody that comes out with a hit album and then spends the rest of their time drunk off their ass or doing drugs. That's maybe that's their creative routine, is staying high all the time. But business people in the world, they're going to pretty much have a set routine that they've stuck to in order to achieve what they've achieved. They don't, somebody like that's worth $1 billion doesn't decide that they're going to, put off, a meeting with another company or, a project that has a deadline and, go play Minecraft or something like that. Routine is key, especially if you want to be a professional writer and write all the time. You have to have consistency, and you have to be reliable and have a process that you can use that's reliable to output the product that's going to make you money you can live on and pay your bills. So procrastination is probably the number one enemy of any creative person, to be honest, other than, chronic depression or things like that, which can be a completely different video on itself, though but yeah, so to be a professional and good at anything, you have to have a routine, and you have to polish improve your weaknesses and polish your strengths and sustain them. So, yep, that's how you're going to find success when you're doing it that way. So just keep in mind, pretty much this is, I don't think you need to really investigate more into this. Just sit down and be honest with yourself. Are you writing and just coming to, kind of an impasse where you can't proceed with your writing, but you have been consistently writing, or are you never actually sitting down and writing and you're making excuses? Be honest with yourself. I mean, I'm the king of, like I said, I'm the king of procrastination. I'm just lucky that I have a memory where I can pretty much hold, hundreds of pages of information of ideas I've come up with. Otherwise, yeah, I probably wouldn't even bother. But so yeah, take it from me. I know what being a procrastinator is all about, and I'm very honest with myself, and I'm not lying to myself that I'm I always call myself out on my BS if I'm starting to make excuses for not doing things. And you need to do that as well. Just, be honest with yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it. Don't feel guilty about it. Just put the effort in to get towards being disciplined and having a routine so you can be more successful. So yep, that is it for this video. I will be back with a video soon. Until then, take it easy. Until then.